Cities have always fascinated me. During my time in Seoul, Korea, I could see how the mudang rituals or female shamans reflected the city's tensions between modernity and tradition, between meaning and practicality, and between immortality and the mundane. My constant visits to the Ravi, a slum in Mumbai, during my time as a student at the United World College in India, allowed me to see the urbanization process and spark my interest in social and sustainable development. Walking through the streets of the Ravi, I saw poverty that was hard for me to conceptualize. My internship in the illegal settlements of Mexico City allowed me to see the urbanization of poverty and the role of migration in fueling urban growth. Thus, I knew that my senior project would take place in a slum. My senior project is the result of 4 years of interdisciplinary work, combining anthropology, geographic information systems, sociology, and migration studies. It focuses on the livelihood strategies of urban refugees in 4 areas: housing, food, employment, and education, in Kisenyi Slum, in Kampala, the capital city of Uganda. My senior project is divided into 2 parts. In the first part, I explored the reasons the refugees I interviewed come to live in the slum and their living conditions. In the second part, I argue that the strategies the refugees engage in to obtain resources have an impact on their identity, while at the same time the identity of the refugees might determine the type of strategies they engage in. By looking at how these strategies and identity merge, one can think of how to better integrate them in the city. My initial intention to go to Uganda was to learn more about the impact of the country's peculiar land tenure systems in the slum formation. But things changed a bit once I got there. One day, while witnessing the local elections, many Ugandans were protesting because apparently a Somali that had become a citizen of Uganda had cast a vote for a local youth councillor. The Ugandans claimed that he did not have the right to vote, and that after all, he lived in better living conditions than the rest of the slum dwellers, because Somalis apparently receive a lot of help from UN agencies. From the national's perspective, ethnicity never disappears, and a foreigner in the slum always remains a foreigner. But many of these foreigners were not tourists interested in enjoying a holiday in Kampala's poorest slum. They were refugees making a living. At the beginning, I asked myself, why did these refugees would not prefer to live in a camp, where they are more likely to have access to food, shelter, and health, and have consular protection than they would in a slum where they are likely to have very little social support and no basic services at all? If they came to the slum, what were their living conditions, and how did they meet their needs in regard to food, housing, education, and employment? Paul, a Congolese refugee, exemplifies the reason why the refugees I interviewed prefer to live in the city than in the camps. Paul had come to Kampala hoping that the city would be large enough to have a space for him. When I met him, he was drinking waragi, a spirit, from a bag that cost him around 25 cents of dollar, an amount he says he sometimes earns per day. Paul was fleeing from what is known as the Second Congo War and had lost his family. Yet every time he could, he would return to Kinshasa, the capital, hoping that he would find them. Due to this mobility, he has been unable to find a stable job or pursue further education. When he goes to Congo, he sleeps in the streets so that he can run if somebody tries to shoot at him. Whenever he comes to Kampala, he stays with his friend, also from Congo, who gives him shelter in the slum. He decided to live in the slums attracted by the ideas of what the city had to offer him. He would remain anonymous and unknown to the authorities, but he would also have access to what he thought was a better job market. He also had friends from his country in the slum, which meant that he could find cheap shelter and communicate and work in terms he was familiar with. Paul exemplifies the pull factors and the role of social networks in facilitating resettlement. Cora, on the other hand, ran away from the camps. For her, the days in the camps were all the same, that in the end there was not much to say about them. Isolated geographically from the host community and living in conditions that for her seemed underserviced and overcrowded, she decided to come to Kampala. However, when she arrived in the city, she had the problem that her qualifications as a lawyer were not recognized, which meant she could not get a job in the formal market. She did not give up. Instead, she opened a restaurant where she cooks Eritrean food. In her free time, she offers legal advice to other refugees. Cora exemplifies the push factors that lead some refugees to leave the camps, the agencies refugees have, and how well educated they are. Refugees are generally perceived to be a burden to the hosting community if they do not work, and if they do, they are perceived to take jobs from the local community. However, the entrepreneurial spirit of Cora has the potential to create jobs for both Ugandans and refugees alike. I also see the role of food as playing an important role in integrating the refugees culturally within the city. A Somali mentions that he exchanged large amounts of maize in the camps because Somalis do not eat maize, and he does not know how to cook it for a small amount of meat. Over time, his food preferences resisted any change. In the city, he has been able to cook more Somali food and keep close ties to his country. At the same time, he has started to get exposed and used to Ugandan food. I believe that if they are taught how to cook Ugandan food both in the camps and in the cities, the process of acculturation will be faster. Providing them with enriched food can decrease malnutrition due to lack of consumption. Refugee camps are meant to be temporary, but the conflicts that force people to live in them oftentimes are protracted. In light of this, many refugees prefer to leave the camps for the city. These camps can still conjure images of overcrowding tents and under-service facilities, but our idea of a mute refugee, dependent on international aid, surrounded by the silence of the camps, where every day is the same, is changing. They have agency in the city to conduct their life, and it needs to be fostered by giving them the right to the city. Thank you very much.